Make sure to deposit it properly, you good for nothing.
My brother said it was a wedding invitation as he handed me the envelope. Even though he stole my ex-wife, he demanded alimony as if it were his rightful due. There's no more unwelcome news than this about a wedding. The whole situation makes me so sick to my stomach, I feel like throwing up. Satisfied with my irritated expression, my brother casually left. I have no intention of attending the wedding or paying alimony. Just as I was about to tear up the invitation, thinking I couldn't stand being made a fool of any longer.
Two of us will go.
We won't give any congratulations.
My parents stopped my hand as I tried to tear up the hated invitation. I couldn't understand why they were stopping me, but they looked straight at me and nodded. It was a look of determination on their faces. Sensing danger from my quietly furious parents, I had no choice but to agree. My name is Harrison Smith. I'm a 34-year-old office worker. I had a wife named Margaret. We met at work and decided to get married after just 6 months of dating. We both wanted to get married quickly if we found the right person. My parents were surprised by our hasty decision, but they respected our choice, saying,
If you both want it.
Our married life started with high hopes of building a new family, but it was short-lived. Margaret began neglecting household chores. This change in her marked the beginning of a shift in my life. She stopped doing the dishes, and her indifference to household chores gradually expanded. Coming home to a messy home and no prepared meals became the norm. Despite feeling doubts and anxieties, I found it hard to confront the issue. One day, Margaret spoke with vacant look in her eyes.
I just can't stand being at home.
She began going out more, saying she felt suffocated at home. I was worried and tried to talk to her, but every time, she made a face that looked like she hated it, and I couldn't bear to watch. Maybe she was tired of the new life, so I decided to wait and see how she was doing without forcing her to tie her down. Thinking so, I tried my best not to say anything. It was all because I cared about her. However, contrary to my feelings, she went out without doing any household chores, without hesitation or guilt. As a result, the worst possible scenario awaited me. One day, when I got home from work earlier than usual, I found an unfamiliar coat on the coat rack. I had a bad feeling about the men's one. It suggested that there was another man in the house besides me. There was no way Margaret could be cheating on me. Repeating that excuse in my head, I searched for her. She was nowhere to be found in the living room or kitchen. Heading to the bedroom, which I had reluctantly considered, I hoped it was a lie. While screaming in my mind that it had to be a lie, the moment I approached the door, my brother Scott burst out from inside.
Wow, this is awkward. You shouldn't be home at this hour. You really can read the room.
He mocked me as soon as he saw me. My irresponsible brother had dropped out of high school and been kicked out from home by our parents. I had heard he'd been living alone since then, but I never imagined we would meet again in front of my own bedroom. Why are you here? Before I could ask that question, Margaret peeked out from behind him.
Why are you back so early? I was having a great time with Scott.
She complained. Her clothing was obscured by the door, but it seemed she wasn't wearing any. The fact that a man and a woman were in the bedroom without clothes on made my head go blank, and I couldn't find the words to say. Why? I muttered in a voice that wouldn't come out. Margaret answered as if it were obvious.
Why? Because I got tired of married life with you. Scott is much more interesting and fun.
My heart was torn apart by pain. Seeing me feel nauseous with shock, Scott seemed to enjoy it. Afterwards, I couldn't recover from the events and ended up bedridden for a week. Even while I was bedridden, Margaret went out with Scott, leaving me alone at home. After a week, I could barely stand, but Margaret was relentless. As if to add insult to injury, she brought divorce papers and presented me with an outrageous demand.
I want $10,000 for emotional distress. Being married to you has been a nightmare.
Asserting herself as if she was the victim, she was completely hostile towards me. Even though it was Margaret who was cheating, why should I have to pay alimony? The anger and despair towards their infidelity haven't disappeared. My heart remains deeply wounded. However, still wanting to believe in her, I pleaded with her to see reason.
Wake up, Scott is crazy. He's definitely fooling you.
My brother Scott is charming and smooth-talking. He was good at winning over women and had gone through many breakups during high school. He learned to exploit women, engaging in relationships through apps while extorting money from them. There had been a woman who came to our house with a lawyer, claiming she was deceived by Scott. My parents were pessimistic about his future, and paid her a settlement to avoid further trouble. The betrayed anger on that woman's face from back then is still unforgettable. Margaret may also be vulnerable and deceived by him. However, my feelings of wanting to believe that were completely shattered by her.
Scott understands me the best. Don't act like you know everything without knowing anything. Write the divorce papers right away. Otherwise, I won't be able to marry him.
The moment I heard those words, I realized all my efforts had been in vain. I had worked hard at both household chores and work, thinking we could support each other as a family. Margaret callously left only the divorce papers and left. Feeling nothing but frustration, tears were all I could shed. For months later, alone in a home devoid of my beloved family, I spent my days. After Margaret left, my parents, upon hearing about Scott's impending marriage, rushed to my house in a panic. They thought I knew something. I told them everything that happened so far. Shocked by the surreal reality, they were visibly angry and upset.
Is that what family does? Unbelievable. We spoiled him too much.
My father said and apologized for his poor upbringing, while my mother hugged me as tears flowed. Thanks to my parents who understood my feelings, I felt somewhat relieved. However, just as we were enjoying that brief moment of warmth from our family, the doorbell rang, disturbing us. The person seen through the window was Scott.
Hey, it's me, Scott, your loving brother. I've brought an invitation just for you, out of the kindness of my heart.
He shouted toward the inside of the house. Feeling a surge of anger towards him, who treated me like a toy. He came just when I thought I was starting to recover from the shock of divorcing Margaret. My father offered to go instead, but I insisted on going to the front door. When I opened the door, Scott stood there with a big smile on his face. I couldn't understand what kind of thinking led him to push people this far. I don't know what reason he has for pushing me to the edge.
Here's the invitation to my wedding. What about the alimony? Make sure to deposit it properly, you good for nothing.
He said, handing over an envelope. Despite stealing Margaret, he demanded alimony from me as if it were his rightful due. There couldn't be a less joyous wedding announcement. This is sickening. I feel nauseous. Seeming satisfied with my frustrated expression, he casually left. I have no intention of attending the wedding or paying alimony. As I was about to tear up the invitation, my parents intervened.
2 of us will go.
We're not celebrating anything.
My parents stopped my hand as I tried to tear up the hated invitation. I couldn't understand why they were stopping me, but they looked straight at me and nodded. It was a determined expression. Sensing danger from their quietly simmering anger, I had no choice but to nod. Hours later, when they returned, it turned out Scott had also visited our family home, and 2 invitations had been delivered there. For my parents, it's the wedding of the second son's ex-bride, who betrayed him, and the marriage of the troublesome eldest son. They don't need to attend such a thing, but they stubbornly insisted on going. Furthermore, they said,
We'll just say a few words and come back. Don't worry. You just stay home.
Implying that while they'll attend, I don't have to go to the venue. Honestly, I don't want to attend the wedding. If anyone who knows about Margaret's and my relationship is there, they'll find out that my own brother stole my wife. What will happen to me then? Just humiliation, embarrassment, nothing else. If Margaret marries my brother, she'll become part of the family, but it's just a facade, and I can simply stay away from them in the future. That's why I absolutely don't want to attend the wedding. My pride and reasoning are vehemently refusing. A wise man avoids danger. Perhaps, due to all the unpleasant experiences I've had, I've become sensitive to pain. If I experience anything more unpleasant, I feel like I won't be able to trust anyone ever again. Perhaps because of such thoughts, my father throws a question at me, seeing my conflicted expression.
Isn't it okay if it gets exposed? After all you've been through, do you still have lingering regrets? Just tell them that she cheated instead.
If I speak the truth, I can imagine what will happen at the venue. I might witness a ridiculous scene. Upon hearing his words, scenes of humiliating Scott flashed through my mind. Perhaps I wanted to seek revenge, having been continuously victimized by Scott and Margaret. Seeing me not objecting, my mother smiled and nodded.
Well then, Harrison, you're coming too. Let's show them what we're made of.
That's not a statement of attending a wedding. It's more like a signal for storming the enemy's stronghold in a movie. However, my mother's eyes are not smiling, and there's no hint of joking in her expression. Her eyes are pleading for seriousness. Pressured by my parents' unusual determination, I find myself deciding to attend the wedding, despite having no intention to do so. I don't know what will happen, but I know they aren't there to celebrate. Both of them seem fierce, their eyes bloodshot with determination. Imagining that red rain might fall at the venue, I waited for the day to come. 2 weeks later, the worst wedding for me arrives. Planned to meet up with my parents before the venue, I waited, feeling uneasy. This is the first wedding attendance that makes me feel so depressed and angry. I couldn't even sleep the night before. Feeling further disturbed by sleeplessness, I felt like a drunken ant stuck in an eternal ant hell. Maybe it would be better to just forget everything and go home. That brother and ex-wife of mine, both have the lowest level of character and no significant earnings. Since the image of happiness is far from reality, maybe it's better to ignore them and just live my own life. Revenge won't make me feel better, as they often say in TV dramas and comics. Just as I began to think that such things were futile, it happened.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
I was called out from behind. It was my father's voice. When I turned around, my parents were there, looking neat and tidy, which was a bit of a relief. I was worried they might show up looking weird and ruin the wedding.
You're not thinking of coming all this way and then leaving, are you?
It seemed my father had figured out from my expression earlier that I was troubled about something, and now he was questioning my resolution.
No way. I wouldn't come all this way just to turn back. Stop standing around here and let's go inside already.
Trying to brush it off, I hurriedly made my way to the venue. As we entered the venue, the receptionist asked,
Are you all family?
and I replied,
Yes, we are.
So we were guided to the waiting room. Perhaps the receptionist had been considerate, but they could never have imagined the unexpected turn of events their guidance would lead to. In the waiting room, there were my ex-wife Margaret, dressed in a bridal gown, and my brother Scott. As soon as they saw us enter, Scott burst into high-pitched laughter.
Hey, look at that. He actually showed up. Are you serious? Even his own family thinks he's nuts. What's the deal? Can't forget about Margaret even now.
The vulgar laughter echoed in the waiting room, and Margaret sneered at me as if I were something filthy.
Stop it, it's disgusting. I'm desperately trying to forget about you. What do you think you're doing coming all the way to the waiting room?
She seemed to be completely disgusted with me. I was taken aback by their reactions, which seemed so unlike a couple who had once been married. Then, ignoring their responses, my father cut through the tension.
Scott, congratulations. I heard you were getting married, so I brought this for you,
he said, handing Scott a piece of paper. To his surprise, the paper he received had the word invoice written on it.
Before you get married and leave, you need to pay back the money you owe to the women you've caused trouble for. By the way, I didn't tell you this, but the women you've dealt with in the past aren't just her.
Although my father confessed that there were other victims, Scott staring in disbelief and questioning.
I've informed the victims of today's wedding. So now, you need to face your own sins properly. That's the final lesson as a parent.
With that declaration, the receptionist who had just rushed in earlier reappeared.
Excuse me. There are a lot of uninvited guests. And they're all asking for the groom.
Behind my increasingly pale brother, Margaret looked bewildered, still not grasping the situation. My mother spoke to Margaret.
Margaret, thank you for marrying my son as if you were swapping him out. This doesn't happen often. By the way, did you know that your family owed us money? Without telling you, they borrowed money from us. Pay it back by the end of the month.
Margaret was further informed about the debt of her family. Her face turned pale immediately, as well as Scott also heard about it, and looked even more pale. On their auspicious day, their sins were exposed to each other, and further victims pouring in led to the cancellation of the wedding. Afterwards, dozens of victims emerged, and Scott ended up being sued for deceiving many women. Although he tried to appeal to Margaret, she had her own problems to deal with. Margaret's parents had borrowed money from my mother, and they were told to sell their family home if they couldn't pay it back. Eventually, the talk of suing me for damages fell through. After all, I was the one who was cheated on, so there was no ground for them to claim damages. If anything, I felt like I should be the one to claim damages from them. I thought Margaret's family was wealthy. They owned several properties and had rental income, so I heard Margaret didn't need to work. But that was wrong. Her family was struggling to pay off debts. Initially, they were making a profit, but as the years went by, the number of tenants decreased, leading to deficits. They tried to keep the business going by borrowing from the bank, but when that became untenable, they approached my parents for advice. My parents are farmers and own the largest piece of land in the area. Their products are branded, generating significant profits, so it was easy for them to pay off Scott's compensation and Margaret's debts.
When I think about it for my children, it's just a drop in the bucket.
My father said, making me realize his greatness all over again. Later, Scott was criminally charged and arrested for deceiving many women. Margaret's family couldn't pay off their debts, leading to bankruptcy. Her family was scattered to the winds. Despite being the worst wedding ever, Margaret was so stubborn as ever that she still calls me.
Hey, can't we start over? I was wrong. I'll make it up to you properly from now on.
It was a desperate plea, but her desperation only made me feel colder towards her. I couldn't help but wonder if I had married a woman who didn't feel embarrassed about what she was saying. I even began to question whether I regret divorcing her. I wish she would just disappear without saying anything, but despite that, she was persistently pressing me, so I left her with cold words.
Don't ever call me again. If you ever try to get involved again, I'll call the cops.
And I hung up. Realizing that I was married to such an outrageous person made me feel fortunate that I was divorced. When I was betrayed, I hit rock bottom, but now I feel nothing about it. Humans are strange creatures. Freed from Scott and Margaret, I became more proactive in interacting with my parents than ever before. I quit my job and started helping them with their work. I wanted to learn from my great parents while they were still active.
You're really something. You finally became an office worker, but now you're just helping us with work.
My father was amazed at my quick actions but not seeming to dislike them. As I continued to help his work, I became close to a woman from one of our business partners and started dating her. Before, I used to get married quickly, but now I want to take my time and really get to know my partner. You can't believe everything. Trust and credibility are built over a long time of understanding each other. When I liked Margaret, I thought I just had to be kind to her, but that ended up spoiling her. If only I had been strict with her back then, things might have turned out differently. My own leniency can also result in the other person's dependency. This time, I don't want to enter a dependent relationship. I want to cherish this new relationship. My mother seemed relieved to see me like this.
Well, take it easy and don't rush. I married your father, but I've had many regrets. Still, I kept coming back because I thought there was no one else. But now, it doesn't matter.
The way mature couples see things is always so serene. They're like the air, you can't live without it. While acknowledging their presence, you can also ignore it, a relationship that can only be achieved after years of maturation. I want a family like my parents. My experiences have taught me that it's the relationships that need time. I vow to walk towards the future with the person who can truly make me happy, building a family together.